Worsening weather in Gaza is making life more difficult for displaced Palestinians. Heavy rain has flooded hundreds of makeshift tents and shelters. It's drenched the few belongings that families have, like blankets, mattresses and clothes. Now, as winter sets in, it's leaving Palestinians who have little protection exposed to the harsh weather conditions. Israel continues to block the entry of materials like tents and mobile homes, violating the U.S. brokered ceasefire deal.
I've been crying since morning. Look at this view. How can I get rid of this water inside the tent? How can I deal with my problems? I'm young and I just need help. I'm a widow. I don't have a father, a brother, a sister, or anyone else. I don't have anyone to turn to. I'm a stranger here. There's no one to help me. We're exhausted from everything we've been going through during this war. Look, I don't have a mattress or a blanket. My children are young. They need winter clothes. I just want my message to reach the world. My body is exhausted from all this. I'm an orphan, and my children are orphans too.
Let's go to Hani Mahmoud, who joins us from Gaza City. Hani, and it seems there's even more rain in the forecast. How challenging are the conditions for Gazans right now as they try to get through the winter?
Aline, it's very difficult to see it's evolving, and the sad part is only the beginning of the winter season. We've seen cold temperatures at night and the strong wind cutting through the thin sheet of many of the makeshift tents here as if they were not even here. But over the past 2 days, non-stop rain that has flooded much of the area where displacement sites have been set up for displaced families for the past 2 years. This is the third winter, and these families have been living through the same exact tragedy of taking much of the hardship created by the rain, by the heavy rainfall, the flood that is now covering and submerging many of the areas in Al-Mawasi and in central area, as well as here in Gaza City. But people have been telling us how their tents are flooded inside, how they've been sleeping over the past 2 nights on wet mattresses, how their blankets are soaked with water, and how their clothes are drenched. And we've seen some of the footage emerging on social media of younger children trying to get out of their tents where the level of water up their waist as they try to make their way into a dry area. It doesn't look like it's going to dry anytime soon. The weather is so cloudy, and many of the areas have seen higher level of water. And what's the really heart-wrenching part now, it's the dirty water mixing with sewage is creating environment for diseases that is spreading quickly at this time. And we know with this there is health risk involved with respiratory problems, and the spread of diseases are already causing an emergency at the hospital here in Shifa Hospital, where cases documented of cold and respiratory problems already documented inside Shifa Hospital. These shelters have never been prepared to withstand their heavy rain, let alone the strong wind at night. We've seen a lot of people leaving these tent sites trying to shelter in any nearby bombed out building, but those buildings are also at risk of collapsing. There are cracks everywhere, the walls, the roof, and they're leaking from everywhere, from the sides and from underneath, just make the living conditions very difficult for displaced population. This is not just another cold season, unfortunately. It's another layer of danger, another layer of struggle, another layer of evolving tragedy.
Hani, and when it comes to the amount of aid that is coming into Gaza, have we seen any improvement at all in the quantities needed?
Well, you know, Malin, we've been talking about this over the past 2 years, and still the amount of aid that we're looking at is not sufficient enough to address the deepening humanitarian crisis. And now, as we are entering the winter season officially with the first heavy rainfall, it's already exposed now. None of what we've seen over the past months was sufficient enough to face these challenges created not only by the conditions created on the ground, but also by the weather conditions. And people are left now had to battle at two fronts, the hardship of living as well as the worsening weather condition. Right now, it's not just the food and the water, but also other basic necessity, winter supplies, for example, winter clothing, blankets, and waterproof sheets and tents in order for people to survive these conditions. So we're not seeing this coming together. So altogether, creating this hard, difficult living conditions for people here. Markets are still flooded with items that are commercial, that are not source of necessities, not source of protein or of vitamin. You can easily find a can of Pepsi or Coca-Cola here, but not a single bottle of antibiotics or sources of protein, like eggs, for example, has been out of the market. The only time that we've seen eggs here was about a couple weeks ago, and it was just a small amount, not enough for people who want some protein. Fresh meat and other basic necessities are blocked as well, because according to Israeli authorities, they fall outside the humanitarian need, and that's what makes it very difficult for people now.
Hani, as always, good to speak to you. Thank you so much for your reporting. Hani Mahmoud there for us in Gaza City. Joining us from Amman now is Tamara Alrifai. She's Director of UNRWA Communications and External Relations. Thank you for your time today. Tamara, what are you hearing from your UNRWA teams about the flooding in Gaza, and how bad is the situation for families, specifically those living in tents?
Yes, we're hearing that the rains of the last few days have added a layer of vulnerability to people in Gaza, especially as most of the population is displaced and has been displaced several times. And many people, many families live in makeshift shelters or in tents if they are lucky, because there is a scarcity of tents and of shelter material in general, including tarpaulins. You know, that's very heavy-duty cover that families use when they want to shelter from the weather. What we heard over the last couple of days is that over 13,000 households were affected by the rain and the flooding. So over 13,000 families who lived in either makeshift shelters or under tents have even lost that.
Yeah, that's a huge number of people and families that have been affected. What does that tell us about how vulnerable people there are right now?
It tells us that people in Gaza are extremely vulnerable after 2 years of conflict, restrictions on humanitarian assistance, food, shelter material, medicines, but also restrictions on commercial supplies going in, even during the ceasefire. People are hungry, people are traumatized, most people have lost their homes, since here we're focusing on shelter. I really have to reiterate the UN figure of over 80% of all buildings and housing units in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed, and therefore over 280,000 homes of people have been damaged or destroyed, making these people homeless.
So just to be clear, Tamara, I understand that UNRWA has 6,000 aid trucks waiting to come into Gaza. What exactly is stopping them from getting in?
Restrictions on the access of humanitarian food and other trucks onto Gaza apply to everyone, despite the ceasefire. So as you rightly say, UNRWA has enough supplies to fill 6,000 trucks from our warehouses in Egypt and Jordan. Unfortunately, restrictions on the number of trucks that go in, specific restrictions on UNRWA, so the UNRWA, the largest UN and the largest humanitarian agency in Gaza, comes under even more scrutiny by the government of Israel, but also the bureaucratic and inspection procedures upon going into the Gaza Strip are extremely cumbersome. And there are limited numbers of crossings into Gaza, which means that there are very long queues of trucks that are awaiting to go into Gaza. So there are many restrictions, but I have to reiterate that UNRWA is under double the amount of scrutiny and restrictions than other agencies, despite being the largest agency there with 12,000 staff running education, learning activities for children, schools, and also public health care, including vaccinations in cooperation with other UN agencies.
And are you getting a sense that these restrictions are You talked about the security screening, the bureaucracy and so on, but is there restrictions on specific items such as tents, which is what is clearly needed right now?
There are many, many restrictions on items that are described by the Israeli authorities as items of dual use, whereas aid organizations consider these items to be items for basic survival of people in Gaza or in any emergency, really. The government of Israel, during the inspection and the scrutiny, would take out many items that are extremely needed, especially in this winter situation, the cold, the rain, the flooding. And they would remove them, the government, the Israeli authorities would remove them from the convoys. So indeed, not only are there restrictions on the number of trucks that are going in, there are also restrictions on the items themselves that are allowed to go in.
So we've been talking about the rain. Winter is fast approaching. What are the biggest risks, in your opinion, for families that are living in these conditions?
The biggest risks are the food, the lack of food, so the food insecurity, the cold, the lack of shelter, the lack of tents, the lack of winter clothes, but also the lack of fuel to be able to get some heat, and all of the flooding, of course, which can cause immense public health hazards. All of these combined with the 2 years of war have made people in Gaza extremely vulnerable. We spoke of malnutrition already a few months ago. Add to that the different layers, that the latest of which is the flooding because of the war, amidst the destructions, the debris, and also unexploded ordinances. So every aspect of daily life for someone in Gaza is a hazard.
Okay, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us on Al Jazeera English. Tamara Alrifai, Director of UNRWA Communications and External Relations.
Don't miss out and get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.